Hello and welcome to Sideways. This week we're talking about a subject most of us don't want to think about, but one which chases us anyway, no matter what we do to try and shut it out. Bereavement.
Hello.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
All right. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thank you very much. Yes, bang on prompt to the meeting, as you can see.
Yeah, it is exactly the appointed time.
It is. Yeah, and I was waiting for you to let me in as the host of the Zoom meeting.
Well, obviously, I didn't let you in until the appointed time. I mean, I would let you in early.
I wouldn't want to come in early, to be honest. But good to see you anyway. Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine. How's your day been?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Obviously, been grafting hard at work, but yeah, ready to do a bit of recording.
Okay.
We're getting used to it, aren't we? Over the Zoom.
Yeah, we theoretically we could actually meet and record these now, couldn't we?
I think we probably could. Yes.
I'm not sure what the regulations are now. Can't you meet with 2.5 people in your garden over a barbecue or something like that?
Yeah, as long as they're your third cousin.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah.
In a pub garden you can meet as well, I think.
You can. That would be quite appropriate to record one of these in a pub, beer garden somewhere, wouldn't it?
We should do that. Funny enough, I went today to. I took Daisy for a walk at Hucking. I don't know if you've ever been there. I
know there's a pub called the Hook and Hatchet there. There is, isn't there?
Yeah, that's precisely why I mentioned it, because I wondered whether you would be able to name the pub, because you pretty much can name the pub. You know, anywhere that I mention, you'll be able to reference a pub in the vicinity.
I can, but I think that particular one alliterates perfectly, doesn't it? Hook and Hatchet at Hucking. It's one of those ones that rolls off the tongue.
It does. It's a very nice pub, actually.
Anyway.
Never mind about my excursions with the dog. What do you want to talk about?
I wanted to talk about something that comes up quite regularly in groups: bereavement-related trauma.
Ah.
And it just fell in this week. Really, I was reminded this week because on the 4th of July, it was the 30th anniversary of the death of John Quinnell. You remember John well as a friend of mine and a business associate, don't you?
I do indeed. In fact, John was instrumental in helping me arrange the mortgage for my first house.
Was it?
Yeah.
Well, and it was because it was John that I'd set up a business with, an independent financial advisory service. We'd both left Standard Life, and it was our sort of first year of trading, and we were all excited. Things were going particularly well. When this tragedy happened, and I sort of I want to talk you through it a little bit, really, on the bereavement side of it, if that's okay. Just indulge me slightly while I set the background of. I mean, it was one of those situations where his demise came totally out of the natural order of things. Yeah. I mean, the bereavement with our friends and relatives are always pretty bad, but when it's in the normal order of things, like when people get to a certain age or they've had a long illness they've been suffering with, you sort of get chance to deal with that, don't you? So almost like factor in that it's going to happen at some point. But when something like this happens without any notice, I suppose is probably the best way to put it, and it comes along. I mean, what happened in this case? And I keep getting reminded of it recently because it was the night that England played Germany in the World Cup semi-final in 1990. Mm-hmm. And it's been, for some reason, they constantly like to play that on the TV at the moment, reminding of the misery of that night anyway.
Yeah, it would have been bad enough anyway that night, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would have been. But on that particular occasion, I remember John had left the office a bit early. We were sort of talking about the game that was coming up, and we was both a bit nervous about it, etc. He left early so he could get some provisions because he had a lot of people coming around to his place to watch the match. And obviously, on the way home between here and where he lived in Hastings, he was killed in a car accident where he'd left the road and hit a tree. And I remember that I got a phone call from his girlfriend who was waiting for him to turn up to sort of get some background of what had happened because he hadn't turned up. And then probably about half an hour later, she rang back and said that she'd had the police on the phone. and said there'd been an accident, and needed her to verify a few of the details. And one of the things at that point also was that they got his number plates wrong by one digit. And it sort of almost gave her a bit of false hope, not that there had been a mistake and it wasn't John involved in the accident. And I think the irony of that was also that John and I had actually seen the car with that number plate on for sale. It was a BMW, the same as that he had bought, and we were on the verge of me buying that BMW because we thought it'd be quite cool to have two similar BMs, at the office there with consecutive number plates. And so I related this to his girlfriend, and she'd gone back to the police, etc. But they come back and said no, it was definitely John. I had to watch. I suppose at that point, I was watching his family start to disintegrate around him. As pretty much I'd watched my own family disintegrate after my younger brother had died, and it brought it back. It brought it back with quite a firm crunch, because it was the unexpected nature of it, and it sort of led me into a position. It was only 4 years after my younger brother had died, and I'd started to get myself back on track emotionally and physically when this happened. And I remember also it was only 2 months after my first daughter had been born. So I was going through these emotional highs and lows at the time. And I remember leaning on alcohol very heavily at this point, as I had with the death of Paul. And I remember also at the time, and looking back on it now, how people were indulging me at that. And this comes up a lot in groups where I had this bereavement, and people were rallying around me and buying me drink, etc., which fed into my narrative really of not only just feeling really, really sorry for myself, but my alcoholism was sparking up, and it was one of those situations where I totally indulged myself, and other people were quite happy to join in with it at that point. I'd imagine you must get quite a lot of people coming into see you, don't you, that have trauma related to bereavements, or bereavements have come along which has altered their way of thinking. And I wanted to now I've set that story up. How would you have dealt with it if a similar situation happened? Someone had come in and relayed a similar story to you. Is there sort of routines you go through with them to sort of talk to them about how to deal with that? Because I think it'd be really interesting to hear. No. And when I say no, that's a slightly obtuse answer, but there isn't a routine that you can go through, because grief is intensely personal. So, there's all sorts of things, all sorts of strands that we can pick up here. Just to take a simple one, that last observation that you made, that it was almost like a trigger point for you to really descend into your spiral of drinking, and that people were kind of complicit with that and enabling that. I think part of what is so difficult for people when they're bereaved is that other people don't know how to handle their grief. And one of the things that people who are bereaved find most difficult is the feeling of kind of loneliness, because people either don't want to talk about the person who's died, or they want to try and almost find a way of hastening them through the grief. Well, you can't hasten grief. You know this because you've lived through it. But one of the most difficult aspects, I think, of grieving and bereavement is the reality that you have to walk through it. There is no option. You can't, as the old children's book, We're Going on a Bear Hunt, you can't go round it, you can't go under it, you can't go over it. You have to walk through it. There is no alternative. You can walk through it as slowly as you like. You can stop if you choose to, but you cannot get through it any other way. You can't ignore it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You have to take that horrendously painstaking journey. And when someone dies suddenly, what feels like long before their time, sometimes that pain can be so intense that you wonder how you're going to make it, and it feels as if you never will. Yeah, I think that's very true. In this situation, John he just had his 28th birthday, so it was an unnatural time for that to happen. And I remember at the time, with my drinking, I was sort of putting my emotions on hold, as it does. We know with drinking drugs, it will stop you feeling the emotion, and so you don't deal with it. And I felt the longer I could keep from sobering up, really,
Yeah.
the easier it was for me to deal with, or not easier, but I wouldn't have to do. I was putting off the dealing with it, if you like.
Yeah.
And I never really did deal with it. It was not really until I went into recovery I was able to, to get help looking back over these things. Because remember, at that time also, it was only a couple of years after John had died that I lost both my parents.
Yeah.
Again, at an age which was outside the norm. And so it seemed bereavement at that point was constantly chasing me around. And I dealt with it by constantly drinking and drinking more to deal with it all.
Yeah, because I think one of the strategies that people sometimes employ with grief, I can see something of myself in this. I know when my dad died, which really hit me quite hard, even though he'd been ill for quite a long time, I took on all the kind of administrative stuff. I did all the probate myself. And it was a terribly onerous task, but I know, looking back on it now, I did it so that I didn't have to notice the kind of hole I was feeling in my emotion. And so, when you describe an acceleration of your drinking in response to all of that bereavement that you're experiencing, I think that feeling that we can deal with grief later is something that's very common in people. And the reason it's common is because the intensity of the feelings after someone dies is often unbearable. You just can't cope with it. In fact, it's one of the reasons why if you go to an organisation like Cruise for bereavement counselling, they won't see you immediately after a death because you're not in any fit state to be able to start processing what's happened and the way that you feel, because you're just in a state of absolute shock. It's like your entire existence has been completely turned upside down, and your emotions, it's a terrible cliche, we should have used it last week, but you're on such an emotional roller coaster. You do not know where you are from 1 minute to the next. There is literally nothing you can do apart from putting one foot in front of the other and trying just the best way you possibly can just to get through the days until some sort of semblance of order starts to re-emerge. But of course, nothing is ever the same again after a significant death. When people, one of the phrases I really cannot stand, people will say, oh, well, eventually you'll get over it. You can't get over death. You don't. It changes you. And I think it's our acceptance of that, our willingness to accept that and kind of surrender to it is the thing that allows us to get through.
No, I agree. It is. In that case, I remember distracting myself because John had been killed at a point where he just exchanged contracts on the purchase of a new property, but hadn't completed. So he was in this awful position of trying to deal with the property developers who weren't playing ball. They wanted it to go through and complete, or to lose his deposit, which obviously was going to financially disadvantage his girlfriend. The life assurance policy, which he was looking after himself, it should have really gone on risk at that point, and it hadn't been put on risk, which meant the policy hadn't started. He was going to put it on once he'd completed. So I'd had a bit of a row with the insurance company about that and managed to get a bit of a payout on that to help alleviate the situation. But I threw myself into that, and it was, dealing with Chris, his brother, and Stephanie, his girlfriend, and his mum and dad. It gave me a sense of a little bit of purpose at that point when I was able to add something to take some of the burden away from them and to be of assistance to them. But it was at the expense of my own emotional recovery, certainly. But that sort of came, I say, much later on down the line. But all the time I was distracted from it, I felt that I didn't have to deal with it.
One of the things that makes bereavement so difficult is that you can't do anything. You can't. There's nothing that can be done. One of the things that distinguishes death from pretty much any other emotional crisis that you can find yourself in, whatever it is that somewhere in us we can find, even if it's fanciful, we can find some belief, usually, that we can turn this situation around. We can lose a relationship, our marriage can break up, we can lose our house, or our job's gone, or whatever, or some sort of dream's been lost. But something in us will say, I can get this back, I can fix this, I can turn this around. So there's kind of some sort of hope, even if it's completely forlorn and completely nonsensical. That kind of drives us forward. With death, there is none. That situation is irreversible. And whilst sometimes emotionally it takes us some time to really settle with the idea that that person is never coming back. We know logically that once someone has died, life is changed forever. We can't fix it. I think that has a significant impact on the kind of depth of emotion that we feel in that situation. You know, in a therapeutic sense, working with bereavement, you have to be willing to do nothing, but to do it in such a way that the person that you're with feels emotionally held. And it's hard.
I can imagine. So, well, I know so, but it was. I remember at the time. It initially, my motivation for carrying on with the business was shattered, and it took me a while to sort of to get myself back together again to move on. But I remember. I think I remember speaking to you at the time because I was feeling this great loss, and I might be wrong here, but I've got a feeling you sort of explained how that person still retains that same position in your heart and your life grows around it. I think you used some sort of analogy with a ball inside a jar or something. Am I wrong here? Or
I know you're right. That's the Tompkins model of grief. There's all sorts of models of grief that kind of describe the different emotions that we cycle through in grief. The sense of shock and denial, and then anger, quite often. And a sadness or a depression, and then eventually coming to accept it. And only when we reach acceptance can we start to rebuild. But of all of those different concepts and cycles and models of grief, which you can find them easily if you Google them, the one that I was always attracted to was this Tompkins model, which said that when someone dies, if you think of your grief like a tennis ball, and then you think of your life like a jam jar. Imagine putting that tennis ball in the jam jar, and that's what your life's like, because the tennis ball fills the jam jar. Your grief completely fills your existence. Your world is filled by the grief. You can't see anything else. There's no room for anything else. And the work of bereavement is not to make the tennis ball smaller, because you can never make the tennis ball smaller. You can never make the person who's died less important to you. They will never be less important. The work of grieving is to make the jam jar bigger and to turn it into a demijohn or a vase or a bucket or something, so that even though the grief is still the same size, you build your life up around it so that it doesn't feel as if it's so consuming. And to me, that was the explanation or the description of grief, which always made the most sense. If you think about John and you think about Paul, neither of them are less important to you today than they were when they were living, are they?
No, not at all. No,
but your life has changed because you're still here, you're still living, and your life has adapted and changed, and you've found your way to creating an existence in which their physical presence is absent, but they're still just as important. And it would be disrespectful for us to imagine that our loved ones become any less important just because they die. They can't possibly.
No, they can't. Because I remember people at the time, both with Paul and with John, and indeed my parents later on, was people would say, time's a great healer. And I used to think, well, that's not making me feel any better right now.
Oh.
That was a cliche I really didn't want to hear. But I don't. But again, it goes back to how people deal with it around you. It's very difficult for other people, and so I can't diss people for saying that to me. But I try not to say it to other people now. But it's very difficult to explain it in any other way, because you do have to sit with the emotion, don't you, and wait for the grieving to take its own course, as you said earlier on.
Yeah, it's one of the questions that people ask me frequently. When I might say something to them like, you won't always feel like this, and they might say, well, how long is it going to take? And that's hard because I have to say, I don't know. I mean, there are some things that help. The thing about the response of other people. Other people find our grief uncomfortable, and that's the reason why people either ignore it or want to hasten us through it. So they might say, that's why people say time's a great healer, because they don't want to see us unhappy. So I suppose it kind of comes from a good place, but it's not very helpful. So I always say to people that are grieving, if you look around, if you really come tune in, you'll realise who the people are that you need around you at the moment. You'll recognise the people that are strong enough to cope with your grief. They're strong enough to be around you without trying to change you, without treating you differently, without wanting to not talk about the person that's died, without giving you ridiculous platitudes about, oh, you'll get through it. You don't want people like that around you. The people you need around you who are the ones that are willing to stand with you while you're in pain. And most of us can find them, but they won't be all of our friends, because some of our friends can't cope with that. Some of our family members can't cope with it. But
yeah, it's an interesting point, because I mentioned the anniversary of this death on one of our online meetings, because we know it comes up. We know it can be a trigger, especially the early anniversaries. I mean, this is 30 years on down the line, but it still brings up certain emotions. And what I normally say to people is, when these anniversaries come along, I try to treat myself kindly, because it used to be an excuse to overindulge in the past, but now I take a bit of time to enjoy the fact that I'm not drowning with sorrows and feeling sorry for myself. So I do treat myself a little bit kindly, and just hasten up my awareness of a drink or taking drugs at this point is no way is going to make any difference. It's just going to make things a whole lot worse. And I think we always advise people to be extra vigilant at these anniversaries, which I am myself, because emotionally we're much more vulnerable. We often tell people, to speak to people about it, plan something to share the moment, or, to take your mind off the situation rather than picking up drink or drugs. So using distraction to get away, because it is something we need to work through. And we know these anniversaries are going to come around every year. It's going to come, and although it does get a little bit easier, I think it's still. I find it quite respectful just to have a little bit of thought about that person. And spend a little bit of time thinking about it, but also think about my own emotions, and to not to beat myself up about feeling a little bit down, but to make sure that I don't to deal with it in a destructive manner. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I would always say to people, as far as possible, step into grief. Don't step away from it, because it will get you. It won't. If it's coming for you, it's going to get you. And those are the sorts of days where it comes for you, anniversaries. And so I think if you can, it's always good if you think about what you're going to do on that day. Some people might want to do something particular, something specific that remembers that person. Some people do the same thing every year. But I think it's dangerous ongoing if you're having problems with that grief, if you try and shut it out. I don't think that's very helpful. And in fact, if I think of all the people that I've worked with who've been grieving, and sometimes I can work with those people for years. Grief it's a long process. But the people who've made it through most successfully, I can't think of another way of describing that, are the ones who are willing to feel what they feel, and they don't try and push their emotion away. And, so the way that obviously relates to addiction is, if you have a history of problems with drink or drugs, then you kind of got an easy way of blocking it out. But that's never going to be a solution. I mean, it's not a solution to anything else in your life. And it sure as hell isn't going to be a solution when it comes to grief. At some point, you're going to have the willingness to allow it to engulf you and to kind of feel that. And if you're able to do that, then, afterwards, when you've given yourself the time and the space to really be shaken by that grief, then go do something nice that takes your mind off it. Do something that kind of reminds you of the value and the beauty of the life that you still got. But if you push it away, I think that's much more difficult. And of course, people who are in recovery historically tried to push everything away. It didn't work.
Yeah, we do, and that does come up. It comes up all the time, and we find it particularly difficult when one of our fellow recoverers suddenly passes away, because that brings up a whole new, and we could do a whole episode on that really. But it brings up all sorts of different emotions at that point. And I know, I've grieved for people that have passed away, good friends in the recovery community. I mean, I hear many stories over the years in recovery, and some of them are very personal to me, and others that come along which are, second and third hand. There was someone that came in recently that she was struggling with her sobriety, And then she said, and then she came out and said that her brother had committed suicide recently. And I remember thinking at that point, emotionally, that was quite a test for me as well. To see someone in that much pain. And I was really proud of her for speaking up and telling us about it, because I think that was part of it starts the grieving process, or it helps the grieving process along. But her efforts to remain sober at that time were inspirational. I had so much respect for that girl, and I think we all gained strength from her strength in that situation. It seemed to me that the power of the peer group setting there was immense. But again, it's a tough one, because you could see people in the group thinking, "What do I say?"
Right,
and it's a tough one, isn't it?
It is a tough one, and this kind of makes me think of two things. One is her ability to talk about something that is so painful and so fresh will probably be very helpful to her in the long run. I mean, you all know this. If I talk to you about Paul, that's nice, isn't it? Because it's like we're keeping him alive. We're keeping his memory alive. So you're inviting someone who is bereaved to talk about the person who's died is a gift, is a lovely thing. And people are kind of sometimes fearful of that. They think, I don't want to talk about him or her because we might upset you. You're upset anyway. So not talking about that person just makes the upset worse. But the other thing I want to say, in response to you saying you kind of looking around the group and people are thinking, God, I don't know what to say. Don't underestimate the value of silence. You don't have to say anything. Sometimes people will tell you stories and they're so unbelievably heart-wrenching, there aren't any words, and I find that when people come in and they'll sit down and they say, this has happened to me, it's like there's nothing I can say, really. So I don't say anything. But there's still a tremendous value in someone feeling as if you're okay with them telling you. That sort of calmness, that willingness, that ability to let someone talk and just be with them while they talk is tremendously powerful. Don't underestimate it, because in a peer group, that is gold.
I agree. It's just that sometimes I know when things do crop up like that in groups, you almost feel like they're looking for pearls of wisdom. But from what you just said there are better ways of dealing with that, because there are no pearls really at that point.
Yeah, you have to think about the dynamic that is at play in those situations all the time. Is you could imagine the person who's grieving saying to you, "Please take this pain away from me," and that your only response is, I can't. What's the next best thing you can do? The next best thing you can do is be with someone while they're hurting. Because if there's one thing worse than hurting, it's hurting when you're completely alone.
A lot of valuable lessons there, and I've learnt a lot for listening to what you've been saying. But it's been very serious, isn't it?
It has been very serious, but death is, when it first happens, is serious business, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? It's not something which you can be jocular about, which again, I know people, certainly when I was suffering with grief in the early stages of the grief cycle as well, people would almost try to be funny.
Yeah.
Again, but their response is not what you want to hear, but they're having trouble dealing with it. And so being funny or making jokes, it certainly didn't sit with me very well. It still doesn't. But I can sort of understand why they do it.
Yeah, I think it's something that people do to soothe their own discomfort.
Yeah.
Quite often you find that when you're grieving, the best people to have around you are people that know what grief is. I've probably told you this before, but I can remember when my dad died, and he was kind of the first. I mean, my grandparents had died by that time, but he was the first person that died that I was really close to. And I can remember calling you up and telling you it was a Sunday, and it wasn't so much what you said, it was the absence of kind of shock or kind of panic in you that I found very stabilizing, because obviously you'd already lost both of your parents by that time. And so there was, I think that's what I mean. There's something that's comforting. I knew you couldn't do anything, but there's something very comforting when you feel like someone doesn't know how you feel, because you can't possibly know how someone else feels in grief, but has walked a road like that themselves.
Yeah, it's sort of the empathy of recognition, isn't it? That you've been there yourself, and so you have an understanding on what the emotions the other person is going through.
Yeah. Well, I thought to finish then for this episode, because I was just looking for it, because I remembered I'd sent this to somebody yesterday. there's a writer called Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know if you know her. She wrote a book called Eat, Pray, Love, which is very famous and was turned into a film. Anyway, she lost her partner. Her partner died to cancer, but she had a very sudden diagnosis, and so she died very quickly. So it was a very kind of traumatic bereavement. And since her partner died, she's written some really beautiful things about what it is to grieve. And I just thought, to finish, I'd just read you this little paragraph, if that's all right.
Please, yeah.
So she writes, "Grief happens upon you. It's bigger than you. There is a humility that you have to step into, where you surrender to being moved through the landscape of grief by grief itself. And it has its own time frame. It has its own itinerary with you. It has its own power over you, and it will come when it comes. And when it comes, it's a bow down. It's a carve out. And it comes when it wants to, and it carves you out. It comes in the middle of the night. It comes in the middle of the day. It comes in the middle of a meeting. It comes in the middle of a meal. It arrives. It's this tremendously forceful arrival, and it cannot be resisted without you suffering more. The posture that you take is you hit your knees in absolute humility, and you let it rock you until it is done with you. And it will be done with you eventually. And when it is done, it will leave. But to stiffen, to resist, and to fight it is to hurt yourself."
What a great way to end it. That's a very nice phrase. I'm glad you've done a little bit of research as well then. That's fantastic.
Well, I did it on the hoof while we were talking.
Yeah. So there wasn't too much premeditation in that one then. It was
really. Well, actually, in fairness, I often use that. I think it's such a lovely description of what grief is.
It is.
Okay. So I'll see you next time, hopefully with a more cheerful subject.
Oh, no, yeah. I think we've got plenty to talk about. But, yeah, they're not always going to be this downbeat, are they? But
yeah, of course, death, in the end, of course, death isn't downbeat, is it? Because one of the other things that's true of death is once someone's died, you can never lose them again. Once you find that, when you find a place for them in your heart, they're there forever. They're untouchable.
Forever, yeah.
See you next time.
See you next time, mate. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Sideways was created by Graham Landy and Martin Pankhurst. If you want to read more about our work, visit grahamlandywellbeing.co.uk/sideways-podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, you can find us on our Facebook page at Sideways Podcast, and you can email us to let us know what you think of the show or with any questions that you might have. And finally, we want to thank you for listening and ask that if you've enjoyed what you've heard, that you spread the word. And we'll see you next week.
Sparks in the sky, the children cry, not